Hi there. My name is Raúl Carrillo, and I am an attorney and an associate research scholar at Yale Law School, where I study financial technology from the last 6,000 years, but also hashtag fintech, what we've become accustomed to when we talk about financial technology over the last 10 years. So, my project is focused again on financial technology writ large, and I'm specifically interested in money as an information network. Governments use or issue currency and other financial instruments in order to allow people to interact in commerce and taxation, etc. But they also issue money as a reporting tool. Um, Most obviously, people use the monetary system to create centralized ledgers where they keep track of transactions between people, where they keep track of transactions with the state, with companies, etc. We all build, our record of how we pay for things, of how we borrow, of how we invest, etc. And lately, private sector players have become especially interested in the data that money and all these fintech apps generate. That's not to say that this wasn't present beforehand. Of course, the big three, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, have all collected data on behalf of financial institutions since the 1830s. Not those specific companies, but credit reporting agencies in general. What's changed today is even more of a push to data maximization on behalf of both private companies and the government. Really, Silicon Valley's companies have started this business model where you collect as much data as possible to get more users, to learn more about them, to collect as much data as possible, et cetera, et cetera, right? There's sort of an endless loop. And Silicon Valley companies, including both fintech startups and the big four, Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook, now Meta, have all entered the fray. And they've come to understand that if social media says what you like, payments, credit, they say a little bit more about what you do. And so, in this sense, it's a whole new world. Uh, JP Morgan Chase has recently said that it put out a report, payments are eating the world, just as in software was eating the world just a while back. Much of the rhetoric of private fintech is cast as in the vein of financial inclusion. That means that fintech companies say, oh, the banks aren't serving you well. True. What we want to do is provide you private sector products that allow you to engage in financial services, but you don't have to deal with banks, etc. This is important for people who don't have enough money for a bank account, potentially people who are just on the edges of the formal financial system, but want to participate in finance, of course, nevertheless. The most obvious of these efforts was the Libra project run by Facebook, now Meta, now called DM. And that project aimed to create a currency, then a layer of credit, then a layer of investment, et cetera, and essentially build a parallel financial system. That crashed and burned, but it continues in the development world in other component parts. And again, all companies are coming into this space with the idea that they can collect more data. They are aided by evolved consumer reporting companies, most importantly, Plaid, that partners with Amazon Web Services, as well as this variety of financial institutions, et cetera, to collect data as a data broker that has never been compiled in this sort of one database in such a way. These data brokers are notoriously underregulated, and there are very few rules in the United States except that click wrap contract that indicate how your financial data can be used later on. So the other side of this financial inclusion rhetoric, is financial integrity rhetoric. And the idea here is that via the data maximization, you can also trace illicit flows. You can keep an eye out for bad behavior, essentially. Of course, We see this sort of technology that promotes financial integrity adopted by the government. Often the public law enforcement agencies, for instance, will work closely with private finance players to gain data. Of course, the financial institutions themselves are required to report transactions they find suspicious, or certain qualitative types of transactions, as well as quantitative or transactions that cross a quantitative threshold, to the government. This is a matter of course following the Patriot Act, reflecting many other surveillance systems in the United States. Most problematic in my mind are the release cards, or the gate money, the instrument for gate money that is provided to releasees as they leave carceral institutions. The CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has found these products to be abusive, unfair, deceptive, in the sense that with the fees and fines attached to the card, the financial value of the card erodes quickly. And it's possible for these cards, most prominently the JPay card, to be used to, again, shift data back to law enforcement in ways that they might not be allowed to do if they were just collecting data directly. Another instance is transit systems. The streamlining of transit systems through fintech, for instance, the Omni system in New York, has certainly helped people access things more quickly and more constantly in a wide variety of ways. At the same time, we're talking about sharing data from the cloud with the NYPD, with other actors that are notorious for disciplining communities of color and other vulnerable populations for things like fare evasion. Now, in other senses, of course, the data is used to track money laundering, not the transit system data, but data throughout the financial system, to track money laundering, to track tax evasion, etc. I think that's extremely important. And so what we have, unfortunately, though, is a system wherein the big fish are hardly ever brought to justice, so to speak. So El Chapo can launder all kinds of money through HSBC, and there are no consequences for HSBC. That's a problem with the AML regime. No substantive consequences, I would argue. But if your abuelita sends money back home, whether it's through Venmo, whether it's through Western Union, as we've recently learned, that data can be tracked and shared directly with ICE, for instance. So there is an ethical problem that we face. While these apps, while all this fintech sector stuff might help people, and jury's still out on the financial inclusion line, on the financial integrity side, things get a little bit more problematic. And we're talking about the populations that are targeted for financial inclusion being especially vulnerable, again, to government surveillance. So what do we do here? What does it mean to be ethical? In Europe and in other places, they have been discussing the concept of data minimization, as opposed to the regulatory strategy of data minimization opposes the business model of data maximization. And data minimization can come in a variety of ways. I personally support the Data Act that was sponsored and introduced by Senator Sherrod Brown in 2020, on which I advised, and that would limit data collection in the financial sector and throughout commerce in general to a short list of permissible purposes. So everything else is banned. Right now, so long as the law doesn't say you can't do that as a company, you can go ahead and do what you want with the data. What we want to do is instantiate rules that say if it's not on this list, it's banned and you cannot continue this particular business practice. So, of course, this is a long haul for regulation, but I do believe that we can build a world where things are more controlled, but we allow financial innovation to happen, taking into account these broader consequences. But the most important thing, and I'll handle this last because I think it's a positive vision for the future in terms of ethics, in terms of conscious creation of a system that actually helps people, is that we need to build a public fintech system. Right now, arguably the most important thing happening in the academic and policy debates around fintech is the creation of digital fiat currency, or in the United States, the digital dollar. And what that means is that governments, including the United States government, will soon be able to issue money directly to individuals, household firms, bypassing the commercial banking system, bypassing Silicon Valley apps. And that is an entirely new world. At the same time that it can help people tremendously, we can give everybody a bank account, we can allow people to do money orders more easily. There is a danger, again, because it's precisely the people who are targeted financial inclusion who have a lot to lose through financial integrity efforts. So we can build a system that includes bank accounts, etc., but they need to be attuned to this data minimization standard. Just as importantly, from my point of view, our average commonplace day-to-day, face-to-face, person to retailer payments do not need to be tracked in a panoptic and synoptic way. We should preserve a place in a small c conservative strategy for informal payments that are nevertheless digital. That's why I've partnered with Congressman Lynch from Massachusetts, as well as Rowan Gray at Willamette Law, my longtime colleague, and relied on the leadership of Devi Nakana at that office to create the eCash Act, to create digital dollars, to upload paper cash into the 21st century. These instruments, the eCash instruments, could be your phone, could be a card, but the money itself would be stored on the device, on the hardware, such that this giant question of the dragnet is avoided. And we maintain a space, again, which we can just be people. And that doesn't mean that fintech in the private sector and the public sector that's more data intensive doesn't serve its place, but we really are moving towards a sort of social view of money that I think should cause a lot of people to approach things with caution and with prudence. And so I hope that this video helps folks come to that understanding and look toward designing new systems that are ethical